With that, Albert Breer, Monday Morning Quarterback, is joining us live. Lots to talk about. So I said this, I was talking to a league executive about 2-3 weeks ago. And he said sometimes he felt like the Steelers were making moves to make moves. So, for instance, they move off a very tall, explosive, high-maintenance receiver after acquiring a tall, explosive, high-maintenance receiver. They move off an expensive safety who's past his prime slightly, and then they go acquire Jalen Ramsey, who's expensive, from the secondary, past his prime slightly. Yep. So to me, they're just making moves to make moves. I'd argue today they're less talented, arguably, than maybe a year ago. What are they doing with the latest Jalen Ramsey move?
So here's what I think it is, Colin. Just from a global standpoint, they got to the end of the year last year, and obviously they've got this incredible record with Mike Tomlin of being plus 500 over the last 17 years running. And it just hasn't equaled playoff success over the last 7 or 8 years. So you're knocking on this glass ceiling, and how do you break through? And I think that's really why they decided to hit reset at quarterback. They would have had Justin Fields back over Russell Wilson, but they decided we're going to take a bigger swing at that. So they looked at Matthew Stafford. They wind up with Aaron Rodgers. And at every one of these positions, it's how can we get a little bit better so this core that we have right now, and I've said this to you over the last few weeks, has the best chance of going and pursuing a championship? How does Cam Hayward have the best chance of pursuing a championship? How does TJ Watt have the best chance of getting over the hump and not being a 9-win team anymore, having a home playoff game, being able to advance when they get there? Like, that's what this is all about. And so I think to some degree, I understand what you're saying about, like, this is maybe activity for activity's sake, and maybe it looks like that. But they feel like Ramsey's a better player than Minkah Fitzpatrick. They feel like Metcalf's a better player than Pickens. And maybe those guys have less shelf life. Like, maybe those guys only have 2 or 3 years left rather than 5 or 6 years left. But where they are right now, it was either do this, tread water at 9-10 wins, or reset. And I think they look at it as we weren't going to break through that 9, 10, 11 win ceiling with the group that we had. So let's roll the dice. Let's take a big swing. Let's swing for the fences rather than swing for singles and doubles. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, we were going to have to rebuild anyway.
So I think if you can make March Madness as a college basketball coach, that's why all these coaches want 80 teams in March Madness, you retain your job. In the NFL, if you can make the playoffs, it's hard to fire a coach. I think Mike Vrabel's really bad news for Mike McDaniel in Miami, because I think New England, with Drake May, they don't have to pay him for years. I think Vrabel's elite. They spent $300 million. Unlike Miami's rebuild with McDaniel, where it was flashy, but I didn't feel there was a lot of stake, I feel there's a lot of stake. Lines are better with Vrabel. He's a culture setter, ascending quarterback. We were talking about this a couple days ago on the show, is that Mike McDaniel came from Kyle Shanahan. There was a sense okay, this is 49ers East. I got 3 years. They're not physical. It's a lot of sizzle. I don't trust them out of Miami. I think Miami is a bit of a mess, and McDaniels is in a bit of trouble for an organization that has moved off fairly capable coaches before. What say you on Miami going forward?
Well, he got his extension, and I do think Mike McDaniel's a great offensive mind, and there's no question that I think he gave them a little bit more than they had during the Brian Flores era at the end. He gave them change they needed, just the climate, the building improved, so he did give them that. That said, I'm with you. Like, they kind of got to the point where it's like, okay, now, and I talked about that ceiling with the Steelers, right? Okay, has this run its course? And so rather than being where the Steelers were with a year or two left, they felt like they were at the end with the group that they had. And so Teron Armstead retires. They trade Jalen Ramsey. I still think Tyreek Hill could be had if somebody made a big offer for him. Like, I think this is subtly the turning of the page from we have Tua Tagovailoa on a rookie contract, and we're going to build aggressively, and we're going to find out what Tua is, to now Tua's on a big contract. We're going to need more from Tua, and around him, we're going to have to get a lot younger. And so I think this is the beginning of that process. They got marginally younger with some of these trades, and they're going to have to rely on young guys like Patrick Paul, who they drafted in the second round to play left tackle last year out of the University of Houston. Didn't play last year. Now he's going to be their starting left tackle. It's guys like that who are going to have to come along for them. and Tua's going to have to be better. And to me, like, that's what this hinges on. Mike McDaniel was brought in a couple of years ago to fix Tua Tagovailoa, right? Like, let's see what we can get. Let's see where Tua Tagovailoa's ceiling is. And Tua's played well under Mike McDaniel in that environment where you had him on the rookie contract, where you could build aggressively around him. Now, I think it's sort of flipped, where it was on Mike to revitalize Tua. Now Tua has to prove that Mike was right to stick with him. And so I think a lot of where the Mike McDaniel era goes, and Chris Breer is part of this as well, is going to hinge on whether or not Tua can elevate to the type of quarterback who can lift up people around him, rather than being the point guard out there who's just got a really talented group of players and he can drive the bus.
So I got into this discussion with John Middlecoff, and I were talking about the Packers. So Jordan Love, congrats to him, just got married. Good for him. I love that. I like my quarterbacks to be married. I know, Albert, that sounds ridiculous. I like my mature quarterbacks to be grounded. But it's interesting. Green Bay is one of the mystery teams in the league because we know they're well run. We like their coach. No crazy owner. Mark Murphy's super bright. They draft and develop well. But they are the mystery team in the league because even Washington, I can look at Washington and say, well, who are their 5 best players? And I can point to guys. Green Bay's 5 best players. Okay, I love Josh Jacobs. Kenny Clark's really good. I would argue they've become a little. Yeah, so that's my point. Have they become the Colts, where we know they're well run, we know they've got a good roster, but do they have stars? Because when you start looking at Philly and Detroit and the Rams, where you could pinpoint 4 or 5 guys and go, okay, those are elite difference makers in January. So my take is, what are the Packers beyond well run in a really good division? What are they today?
So I think what's interesting is, like, what makes your point is what they did in the first round of the draft, right? When they drafted Matthew Golden out of Texas, because, like, do they have a bunch of 2s and 3s all over their roster? I think is the question you're asking, right?
Yes.
And you look at that receiver group, and that receiver group showed so much promise early with guys like Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. And so you saw all these guys, and there's so much promise there. But does them taking Matthew Golden in the first round basically tell you that they view those other guys as 2s and 3s, and they need to bring in another number one? Same thing at left tackle. They got Rasheed Walker out there, pretty good player for them. They drafted Jordan Morgan. He's going to compete for the left tackle spot this year after playing guard as a rookie. I think those questions are there on their roster. It's a really solid roster, and I think they can roll out of bed and win 8 or 9 games and be in the playoff hunt. I think what the roster needs now is sort of like what I was just talking about with Miami is, can Jordan Love come in and elevate the people around him? And I think that's something we're going to see. Again, like, I like Tucker Kraft. I like Watson when he gets healthy again. I like Jaden Reed. I like Dontavian Wicks. But I think the question you're asking is, how many of these guys are going to be around 3 or 4 years from now? How many are that good that they're going to be those sorts of cornerstones? And I think that's a fair question to ask. And the one thing that can solve that is your quarterback starting to elevate the people around him. So I do think, like, to some degree, there's a little more pressure on Jordan Love going into this year to elevate the guys around him based on the dynamic that you were just talking about on the roster.
Okay, finally, let's make, because, you know, I know you're probably in the beaches of the Northeast and enjoying your fam here.
I gave you guys a great view, by the way. They told me it was too windy up there, so you got, like, the window unit behind me now. But there was a great view upstairs.
Finally, do you buy the Terry McLaurin Patriots rumors? Because I will say Washington, and I've heard GMs say this, you don't want to spend too much money in a singular unit. Once you're paying Debo, now you have Terry McLaurin, you've got other gaps on the offensive line, you've got gaps in the secondary. Do you buy those rumors? I love McLaurin. I think he's one of the real adults in the room at that position. Do you buy the Patriot McLaurin rumors?
I think the Patriots would love to have Terry McLaurin on the roster. I mean, the one connection that I don't know enough people have made is that Mike Vrabel coached and played at Ohio State. So he knows everything that's needed to be known about Terry McLaurin. And Terry McLaurin is one of the most beloved players to go through that program in the last 25 years. And that's not overstating it.
Wow.
And he was a captain in Washington through a rebuild, through the ownership situation, through the name, like all that different stuff. Like, he was kind of a bellwether through a lot of storms in Washington. And to be able to pair him with a young quarterback, like he just went through that with Jaden Daniels, and it was great for Jaden Daniels, so he'd be great for Drake May. I just don't see where the Commanders are going to walk away from him. I think Terry really values what he's got in Washington, and I've talked to him about this before, like how significant last year was for him personally in being there when they got over the hump and being there when they became a real team after everything that he went through since being drafted in 2019. Remember, he was drafted by Jake Gruden to the Washington Redskins at the time. He's there for the whole Ron Rivera era. He's there for the ownership change. He's there for the name change, all of it. So he really values having been through all of that and having gotten them over the hump. And Dan Quinn really values Terry McLaurin. So that negotiation is in a really tough spot right now because of the way the market has exploded at receiver. And I don't know the communication's been great to this point, but I do think at the end, they're too valuable to each other. And so I do think cooler heads will prevail. But you're right. Like, I think New England will be one of the first teams on the phone if he did actually become available.
Albert Breer, Monday morning quarterback. Enjoy your summer. Mine starts after the show today for me, and it's great seeing you.
Happy summer, Colin.
All right. Good stuff.